Welcome to ZKast, everybody. I'm ZKast from ZK Research, and look who's back on ZKast. It's my good friend Bob Laliberte, who I like to always tease as the second best networking analyst. So, Bob from Enterprise Strategy Group, how you been?
Thanks, Zeus. I'm doing very well, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good. It's new year. Hopefully, I'll get to see you at some events sometime this year. Hopefully, we'll have a little more than we did last year. Before I get started, though, a quick shout out to eWeek, my media partner. All ZKasts are done in conjunction with the eWeek eSpace program. One of the great things about the space we cover, though, is it's always changing. I think the role of the network has gotten increasingly more important. We see more things attached to the network, and I think that's been kind of reflective in a lot of the recent news we've seen. I think one of the more notable events every quarter that I look for, anyways, is Cisco's earnings, because they are such a bellwether. And no offense to the other network vendors, but their revenue is greater than everybody else's combined. So how they go is really an indicator of how the industry is. And, we've seen good continued growth there. And just real quick, they put up a $12.7 billion quarter. The impressive part of it was 6.4% growth rate. For a company that big, that is very impressive. They managed to grow the company and become a $50 billion company while changing the cloud or their company to a cloud and subscription model. So I think demand is strong. Order growth, I know they talked about was up 33% year over year, which is their highest in over a decade. It's also the third consecutive quarter that this metric has topped 30%. And so what were some of your key takeaways from what you heard from Chuck?
Yeah, it was certainly an impressive earnings call from them. And I think some of the ones that I was actually really impressed by was their web scale business. I think that was up by over 70%. And another, I think, proof point of their, they've made the talk about we're going to be more open. But in discussing that, they were highlighting some of their customers where they're just selling silicon. Sometimes they're just selling the silicon and the hardware, but no software. So they're really opening up what they're selling. They're not going at it as you have to buy an end-to-end Cisco approach. And it seems to be working in that business as that continues to increase. So that was certainly one of the ones that was impressive. Certainly their enterprise earnings are up by 37%, something like that. So they're still going strong in the enterprise, which is good. The transition to subscription-based was also really positive. I think now they said, 44, almost 45% of their orders are now coming from that subscription-based revenue. So that transition continues to evolve for them, and it goes really strong. And I think overall, the other interesting news I saw there too is as part of that web scale, the 400 gig business was going strong, right? 700 customers, almost 750,000 ports shipped, with another couple 100,000 in backlog. So really steady state progress that they're making there, and strong across all other areas as well.
So you talk about the web scale and SP business. That's going to be driven in the future by the Acacia acquisition, which I actually think was a great acquisition for them. And I know they had to up their price. I think went from 11 to 13 billion or somewhere in that range. And and I'm glad Cisco did that, because it's always been my feeling that if an acquisition is a good acquisition, then you really can't pay too much, right? And I think Acacia is a very, very good company. I think the way their coherent optics are, from what I understand, best in class. The other, one of the interesting takeaways, Bob, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this, on their quarter, is that people have been calling for the commoditization of Cisco for years. I mean, Huawei was supposed to do it, and White Box was going to do it, and SDN was going to do it, and Cisco's still getting margins. In fact, their margins are up, right? They're still getting well above industry average in margins. And I used to think it was because they were competing with, remember Cisco and the Seven Dwarfs, 3Com, Nortel. I mean, who couldn't beat those guys, right? I mean, those weren't very well managed companies. But now, VMware's in the networking space. Arista's a very good company. Even Extreme's over $1 billion. Juniper's got their, looks like they've got their enterprise act together. And so the competitive landscape is much tougher. And even with that, they continue to roll along and be the de facto standard in networking. And so, I've long believed that no matter what you make, as long as you can add differentiation, you can stave off the commodity curve. And it looks like they've done that. And I think Silicon One is driving that now. So you mentioned Silicon One, and just your quick thoughts on what they built there.
Yeah, it looks like it, obviously that was something they brought about was almost 2 years ago when they introduced it and brought it to the market. And the interesting part that I'm seeing now is that it's not just for the web scale business, but in their most recent announcement, they brought it into the enterprise as well. So they're being able to integrate that across all of their product line, which I think is certainly going to help bolster some of that innovation, that technology, the programmability, that integrated switch and routing. So there's a lot of great capabilities that they're bringing to bear with their Silicon One announcement. And to talk to your point about not being commoditized, they've got just a huge fan base out there of people who they've made their career. And that's something I think a lot of people overlook, is that people are learning about Cisco in high school, in college. And when they get to their the industry, they're fully vetted on and knowledgeable about Cisco products and are comfortable with them. So I think that's still one of maybe the secret sauce that they still have, is that they've got a huge fan base from the people who are actually deploying and using the technology, who have grown up with Cisco and have built their career on Cisco.
All right. Well, to wrap that up, good quarter, Cisco. We'll certainly expect to see more. And if you're a competitor of Cisco's, you should actually be happy Cisco had a good quarter, because as they go, so goes the market. The next thing I want to talk about is F5. F5 is a company we don't talk about often. They've been going through their own transition internally. They've made some really interesting acquisitions, and they announced something called their new distributed cloud web application and API protection product, where we can talk about the marketing people that maybe come up with better naming. But Bob, what is F5's distributed cloud service platform?
Yeah, it's really good question, Zeus, because that is, I'll take a step back first and just talk about the fact that why they're building out a distributed cloud services platform. And certainly with all the new modern applications that are being brought to bear into the market, I think 60% of organizations we surveyed said, hey, we're now deploying these modern apps in production and so forth. And the common theme around these distributed applications is that these modern applications, that they're highly distributed. And so you're seeing them go across data centers, right? Multiple cloud locations, into edge locations, et cetera. And the one thing that hasn't kept up are the services that support them. So the security services, the applications, some of the visibility services that are required. So we're starting to see this groundswell of organizations coming out with these distributed services. And the approach that F5 is taking is that, hey, we're going to do this in the cloud. And, you made the comment around some of their WAP and API services and things like that. And that's really needed in these modern applications that communicate so much via API. So, and as they get more distributed, the need to have them protected is only going to increase, right? So it's really clear that the legacy castle and moat type of security models don't work as things get distributed. And then as modern applications get distributed and they're far more modular, right? And you can have hundreds or thousands of microservices running that are all connecting and talking to each other. You need a way to efficiently, provide those services. And so what F5 has done is build out that classic centralized management with distributed enforcement of the services. And being cloud-based, you can easily allocate those services to where they're needed to go with the applications wherever they're deployed. So they really, and again, this was, some acquisitions that they've brought in to make this happen. They've done a great job of bringing them in, actually turning it around in a fairly quick manner. We're seeing a lot of that, right? Acquisitions coming in and that rapid integration within the organization and bringing out meaningful products. And F5 has done a great job bringing out their distributed cloud services and the cloud-based platform that supports it to enable organizations to adopt to this new model of highly distributed modern applications.
It's a pretty easy concept to understand, right? That if I have an application, there needs to be a bunch of stuff that surrounds the application to make the application work. Think load balancers, think security, DDoS, SSL, right? Things like that. So when my applications were monolithic, I could have monolithic stuff that supported it. But when my applications went virtual, I needed to virtualize the stuff. Hence, F5 came out with Virtual Edition, right? When they went container and cloud native, they bought NGINX, which actually brought that level to it. And now that it's going distributed cloud, they need a distributed cloud version of that. I think one of the interesting things that F5 can bring to the table now is it's the only vendor that can offer those types of ADC services in a physical form factor, virtual form factor, as code in a containerized form factor, and now as a cloud service, and in fact, down to the API level. And this was kind of the vision. The very first time I saw their new CEO, I guess he's not that new anymore, Francois Lecoq speak, it was at a financial analyst conference. And he talked about how this industry is going to change. And he mapped out the decline of the hardware business and the growth of others. And the equity analysts in the room almost choked, right? How often do you hear a CEO talk about his core product declining over many years? But
right.
Indeed, he was right. And I will say, prior to Francois, F5 wasn't a great acquirer of technology. I mean, they had some big swings and misses. Remember Swan and companies like that, but they've been very good about it. And so I really like this announcement because I think the world is becoming more distributed, more dynamic. And if you're an app developer or a network engineer, you need to think about how to tie those environments together. And the only way you can do it is with a distributed cloud service that actually lets you do that in a way that matches the application architecture. So it's not a hard concept to understand. It's a difficult concept to deliver, and it's an even more difficult concept to be able to do across those different form factors, and then have one way to manage that. So that kudos to F5. That was a good announcement, I thought.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So next up on the docket, let's talk about NAC. NAC is back. Well, I don't know if it's back, but NAC, it's never really gone away. It just
never left, right?
So, yeah. So recently Juniper acquired a pretty small company called WiteSand, who isn't the most well-known NAC vendor, but it is a cloud-native NAC. And there's always been this strong demand for NAC, but my criticism of NAC has always been the problem. With IT projects, I like the solution to be simpler than the problem. But NAC wasn't that way. If you wanted to configure and run NAC, I think the process of managing NAC was actually more arduous than not having it in place, right? And trying to imagine the endpoint. Maybe that's not true, but it was pretty close, right? So, what does WiteSand bring to Juniper in your eyes?
Well, I think you mentioned a couple of the key points, which is the fact that it's a cloud native. When you look at the acquisitions that Juniper has made recently, it's all about innovative technology, right? Starting with Mist, going through 128, et cetera. They've brought in some really innovative technology. And I think this goes along the line of that. So being cloud native, being cloud based, those things are certainly attractive. I think the one thing that I haven't seen a lot of people mention, though, is also the fact that they brought in not only the product and the technology, but a strong group of engineering talent as well. So in a time of great resignation going on right now and people leaving technology, it's interesting to see how they've been able to acquire not only great technology, but great talent and the ability to retain them. So while this company was what, maybe a year or so old, I think it was, right? Or just out of stealth recently, I think the key part of the acquisition is not only the technology they were working on and developing and how that will integrate into Mist, but also the fact that they got some really great engineering talent to help them drive that innovation and drive that integration throughout Juniper.
Yeah, I also think that, Bob, some of those acquisitions you mentioned really signal a change in the way Juniper approaches the market. They're all about, they've come up with this tagline, experience first networking. And I think from what I've seen, that's more than a tagline. I think it's kind of the lighthouse for which all product development rose to. And before, historically, even probably before the 128 or the Mist acquisition, Juniper's enterprise go-to-market to me was they tried to be best of breed everywhere. So their acquisitions reflected that. They bought Parabit, who was a really good company, Redline, Funk Software, companies like that, but they were very difficult to integrate. And they wound up with kind of this mess on their hands. I think now they've got this vision of experience first networking. They bought Mist, which brought the AI capabilities. They brought 128T, which integrated very easily into Mist. Apstra, same thing. And I think WiteSand, same thing, right? So they're not the biggest NAC vendor. They're not the most well-known, but they are cloud native and fits very nicely into what Juniper's doing. And so I think from a Juniper perspective, they're now trying to become more of a systems company and sell the end-to-end Juniper story versus trying to say, hey, we've got a better router. Hey, we've got a better WAN optimizer, right? Because that's a very difficult model. It's fair to say it didn't really work for them, but I do think this seems to be working for them. I think we've never, I think, Arista some, companies like that kind of took a little bit of the shine away from Juniper for a while, but I think they're slowly getting their enterprise mojo back. And I think it really centers back to what you talked about, that acquisition of Mist.
Yeah. And like I said, it's really impressive to see how they've done. And so how quickly they've integrated the technology. Like I'd mentioned earlier with the F5 piece, it's not about just buying the technology. It's also about how quickly you can get it to market in a useful form. And so we've seen the mystification of Juniper. And, from what we hear from this acquisition as well, that they expect this technology to be integrated into that Mist portfolio as well, and be able to drive additional efficiencies and benefits, right, gleaned from a mature AI engine into the NAC process. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that evolves and how they're able to perform that integration and the benefits it'll bring for organizations trying to implement NAC from a cloud-based perspective.
Yeah, so looking ahead, so what you brought up there, that last point is really interesting. Is now that networking has gone cloud native, cloud native technologies generally are easier to integrate. If you're all cloud native, you can integrate them very quickly. And you think about how long Cisco took to integrate NXOS with CatOS and iOS, and Juniper took to integrate ScreenOS and and Junos and things. Those old models took a long time, right? Now that networking by and large has gone cloud native, we could see just the innovation engine ramp up, acquisitions happen faster, and the integration of those acquisitions happen faster. So that's really good news for customers, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So that's that innovation cycle accelerating and bringing value to the customers faster. For the longest time, the network is always considered the basic plumbing. But in this highly distributed environment, it's critical now, right? This is critical infrastructure to run your business, and the ability to run it more efficiently and to be able to optimize performance and self-healing and all those great things that come from moving things up to the cloud and being able to leverage that intelligence from the AI ML engines that organizations are developing is going to really help organizations run their network environments way more effectively, which is going to be critical because everything is so much more distributed today.
All right. Well, thanks for joining me. We have a lot of news, and we got a Aruba Atmosphere coming up next month. Cisco Live in a few months from after that and stuff. So I'm sure I'll be talking to you again soon. So on behalf of Bob, I'm ZS Caravella. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to click to subscribe, and I'll see you next time on ZKast.